Hi, everyone, and welcome to Exit to Excel. My name is Latanya. They call me LT, and I'm a career strategist and a former HR leader slash HR business partner with 25 years of experience, and someone who has been exactly where you are navigating career transitions, job searches, and all the challenges that come with building a career that you actually love. So, I created this podcast because after having been in HR for so long and being on both sides of the table, I wanted a platform to be able to share all of my experience and information with people to help them. So I'm doing that with the truth, with tools, with practical advice and positivity, and the elite athletic mindset that is required to play the game. Because if you've been following me, you know that I'm very transparent about the job search. It is a game, and you have to know how to play the game. You have to approach it as a game. So that is what we do here. So I thank you for joining me. So today we're talking about something that 95% of professionals deal with, but rarely admit, and that is interview anxiety. Now, I'm not just talking about the little bit of butterflies that you get right before an interview. I'm talking about that real loud self doubt, negative talk in your head, imposter syndrome, and the fear that you are going to fumble your words and mess up this one shot that you may have at this job that you really want. So, what I've learned over the years as I've been preparing for interviews and also interviewing people and preparing for this episode is that most of the interview advice out there really focuses on how to prepare for an interview and how to respond to different answers, right? Including the dreaded "tell me about yourself," which I hate, by the way, and I'm going to tell you about that in that episode and why most interviewers ask that. But anyway, but most of the advice out there focuses on that, but it completely ignores why very qualified people are not able to articulate what it is that they do in the interview to convince the interviewers that they are the perfect candidate for that role. And they are absolutely qualified. You can memorize perfect answers. You can research every detail about the company and practice your elevator speech until it's flawless. But when you're in that interview, and I'm sure a lot of you have experienced it, when you're in that interview and all of a sudden your mind just goes blank, none of that preparation matters. It goes out the window. But what I want you to understand is that your anxiety does not disqualify you. It actually makes you human. And some of the most successful hires that I've seen over the years who walked in nervous but prepared, they were the ones who came across most authentic but confident in their own way. But here's what separates those people from the ones who let the anxiety sabotage their interviews. They have learned how to work with their anxiety and not against it. Now, if you've been following, this series that I'm on right now, bringing your A game to the job search, stop applying and start competing, you know that we have built a very strong foundation for the job search, right? It started with the personal branding. Then we talked about the target market search. We talked about the brag book, the LinkedIn profile. And last week we went over our networking playbook. But if you don't get the interview right, none of that matters. So today we are addressing the mental game that can either make or break everything we've built thus far. So because I want to give this particular topic is due diligence, I'm actually breaking up this interview mastery series into two parts. This is part one. And we're going to focus on the psychological and emotional barriers that trip up the most qualified candidates. Next week, we're going to get into the tactical part about, the preparation and execution and how to answer certain questions that will help you nail the interview. But I really think it's important to talk about the mental aspect first so that we can get into that part and then have all of our bases covered. So I thank you for joining me. So before we get into that, again, I want to thank everyone who tuned into last week's episode about networking. And for those of you that have sent me, connection requests on LinkedIn, have reached out and talked about people that you've reconnected with, that's what it's all about, right? And as we talked about, networking is not a one and done. And it's not about asking people for anything. It is about nurturing those authentic relationships, right? And the connections are going to come. The job leads are going to come, but you got to start sowing the seed now. So I'm glad to see that people heard that message. They're doing that. So now let's hit up some Ask LT questions, and I pull some aside that are perfect for today's episode about the anxiety around interviewing. So Rita asks, LT, I get so nervous before interviews that I literally can't sleep for days. My mind races with every possible way I could mess up. How do I calm down enough to actually perform well? So, Rita, this is exactly why we're starting with the mindset, because what's going on is that your brain is trying to protect you, but it's actually sabotaging you if you don't know exactly what's going on. So that's why today we're going to talk about the specific tools that you can work with to avoid the sabotaging and actually using that nervous energy to your advantage. So thank you for that question. Next question is Parker. Parker asks, I feel like a fraud in interviews, even though I'm qualified for the roles. I keep thinking they're going to figure out I don't really know what I'm doing. How do I get over imposter syndrome? So, Parker, I feel you. I know exactly what you're talking about. And interestingly enough, 70% of people deal with imposter syndrome. You feel like you're a fraud and that you're going to be, found out. But the fact that you are questioning yourself actually means that you are probably more qualified and not less. And so we're going to break that. I'm going to break that down more. I'm going to devote a whole part of this discussion to the imposter syndrome so that you can understand it and understand how to overcome it. So thank you so much for that question. So next question is Dave. Dave asks, I had a terrible interview last month where I completely blanked out and gave awful answers. Now I'm terrified it's going to happen again. How do I get my confidence back? So Dave, this is another question I can absolutely relate to. And sometimes it's very hard to recover from those stumbles. But, one bad interview performance does not indicate or predict future performance, especially when you're able to learn from it. So today we're going to reframe that experience and give you tools to prevent from, blanking out and sabotaging your future interviews. So thank you for that. So keep those questions coming. Again, you can follow me on social media. Please do that. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, Exit to Excel. If you aren't subscribing to this channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, hit that share button. It means a lot. I know, listen, you're probably looking at this on your phone. Pick up your phone now, hit the share button, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, send this to somebody that can use it, right? It's the gift that's going to keep on giving that I hope. So I appreciate that. And so let's get on to the topic that we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to start out with my own confession. Um, I'm not, sometimes I'm not the best interviewer because of all the anxiety and the self-doubt in the beginning. And especially if it's a job that I really, really want, right? And so I tend to over prepare. And then when I get into the interview, my mind is racing and I'm not able to clearly articulate what it is I'm trying to say. Now, the preparation, I was going to pull this out and show it to you guys. you know, I just did this in the past, few months when I was interviewing for jobs. This is on one company. I have a tab for one company. I got 10, 15 pages on the company, the organization, potential questions and answers, questions to ask. I mean, I was doing my prep, but yet I found despite all this prep that I was doing, it was really my anxiety that was keeping me from performing my best in the interview. So, what I learned though is that my anxiety isn't a character flaw or a sign that I'm not qualified for the role. It is my brain trying to protect me from perceived danger. So, when you are anxious about an interview, it is actually a sign that you care. The people who walk into interviews, kind of lackadaisical, too laid back, from a hiring perspective, from a person who's interviewing that person, sometimes it comes across as being overconfident, or it comes across as that they don't really care about the opportunity. And those are red flags to us. So when you do have a little bit of nervousness and anxiety, it's actually a good thing. And interviewers recognize that. But after, interviewing so many people, I've found that anxiety really affects people in different ways. Either you get very chatty and you over explain everything, you shut down and you don't give thorough answers. You have like these one word answers. You can forget basic information that you know perfectly well, or you can second guess everything that comes out of your mouth. Now, what anxiety doesn't do is that it doesn't make you less qualified. It doesn't mean that you're not ready. And it definitely doesn't mean that you won't be great at the job. But we have to know how to use that anxiety to our advantage. So, this is the deal: your brain does not know the difference between a tiger and between, you know, a job interview. Your brain can't tell the difference because both of them are going to trigger a fight, flight, or freeze response. So a certain part of your brain takes over, your prefrontal cortex, where your logical thinking occurs, it actually goes offline. It goes dark. And suddenly you can't remember even the most basic facts about yourself and your experience. So that's what's going on, right? When you say, oh my goodness, I have a, we often say we have a brain freeze, right? That's what's going on. Your part of your brain where your logical thinking occurs, it just goes dark. And that's why you freeze up. So, what I want to do is I want to talk about the three types of interview anxiety. And, as I'm going through these, think about which ones apply to you. So, the first type is performance anxiety. What if I mess up? This is the fear of making mistakes and saying the wrong thing and not performing perfectly. That is me all day, every day. Like I said, I prepare to the hilt. I want to be perfect. I want the interview to come off flawless. And so I'm always anxious that I'm not going to perform up to par. The second type of interview anxiety is the evaluation anxiety. This is if, hey, what if they don't like me? If you have this type of anxiety, you often fear judgment, you fear rejection, and you fear not being good enough. And the third type is uncertainty anxiety. Now, this is often for people who are control freaks. They have to be in control of everything. They have to know everything in advance. So they fear, what if I don't know what to expect? They fear the unknown. They fear what questions are going to be asked. They fear what the process is going to look like. They fear, like, okay, what are they really looking for? Now, the good news is each of these types of anxiety have specific strategies to help you manage them. And here's what a lot of people don't realize: a little bit of nervous energy can actually improve your performance. Now, think about um, artists and athletes. How many times have you ever heard someone say that they don't get nervous before getting on stage or before a big game? Never, never. You never hear anybody say that. You hear Beyonce say that. You hear Taylor Swift say that. You can hear LeBron James saying that. Everyone has that nervous energy. It is absolutely normal. So if these people who are at the very, very top of the game, the best of the best, if they can experience anxiety before they are getting ready to perform, then it is absolutely normal for us to have anxiety about something that means so important to us. So what we want to do is we want to reframe our relationship with anxiety. So instead of focusing on eliminating it, which is nearly impossible, we're going to learn how to dance with it. We are going to use it to our advantage and think of it as information and not a problem. So, what is the anxiety telling you? The anxiety is telling you that the opportunity is really important to you, is telling you that you want to do well, is telling you that you care about the outcome, and it tells you that you're human. That is what our anxiety is telling us. So, also, you should know that as an interviewer, we expect you to be nervous, right? And we do give grace. I mean, we do give grace when a person is nervous because we understand. Because remember, more than likely, we have been in your seat interviewing as well. So we recognize that. It's the ones who come in overly confident, sometimes arrogant, and very relaxed. Like, I mean, honestly, it's like, okay, if I get it, I get it. If I don't, I don't. That's not really a person that a hiring manager is looking to invest a lot of time and energy on. They want somebody who really cares and who really wants the job and know that it really matters to you. So just keep that in mind as you're interviewing and working with interviewers. The interviewers are human too. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about the elephant in the room that no one likes to discuss, and that is the imposter syndrome. The voice in your head that tells you you don't belong there, you're not qualified enough. They're going to find out that you are a fraud and you ain't all you say you are. Um, as I said earlier, 70% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point of their career. I don't care who you are, I don't care what level you are. 70% of people experience it. So think about that. You have a room of 10 people, seven of those people are going to think that they don't belong there. Okay. Now, here's the kicker. Imposter syndrome often hits hardest when you are actually the most qualified, because the more successful you become, the more you start to question yourself and feel like you're fooling everyone. So there are four phases of the imposter syndrome. So, and these are going to mirror a little bit the different types of anxiety that we just talked about. So, the first type of imposter syndrome is the perfectionist. And this person thinks if I can't answer every question perfectly, then I don't deserve the job. This person overprepares to the point of paralysis and beats themselves up over any perceived mistake. Again, that is me. I have my notebook. I'm trying to memorize all the questions I might be asked, the answer I'm going to give, all of that. And I'm so afraid that I am going to make a mistake. And so therefore I focus so much on the preparation that I'm not focusing enough on the, mental part of it to be able to be, calm enough and focused enough to be able to present my best self. So that's the perfectionist. Then you have the expert. So this type of imposter syndrome is I need to know everything about the interview before I need to know everything about everything before I can interview. This person will often delay applying because they feel like they need more experience, more skills, and more credentials. So they kind of like just sit there waiting until they can jump. It's almost like, double Dutch jump rope. You stand off to the side, watching the rope go around, and you're like, okay, I'm going to jump in, I'm going to jump in. You never jump in. Then you have the natural genius. This type of imposter syndrome is if I have to try hard or practice, it means I'm naturally not good enough. This person thinks that their competence should come effortlessly, and they struggle with the idea that interviewing actually requires work and preparation. Then finally, you have the superwoman, superman. And this person thinks I need to excel in every area to prove that I belong. This person feels that they have to be perfect at everything, and they never show any areas for growth. So, which one of these resonates with you? Now, a lot of times you may see yourself in more than one, right? So, for me, I know I absolutely see myself as the perfectionist, and I also see myself as the expert at times. So, now let's talk about the qualifications, because at the end of the day, when you're requiring, applying for a job, you see the list of qualifications. And a lot of times we will disqualify ourselves because we're not meeting all of the job qualifications that are on there. And I tell people all the time, look, let them eliminate you. You don't eliminate yourself. Absolutely put your hat in the ring, because at the end of the day, we don't expect you to check off every single box. If companies expected a person to check off every box, then they would just go ahead and promote from within. But when companies have these job descriptions with, all the qualifications, that is their ideal candidate. And they really don't expect to get their ideal candidate. I'm telling you, that never happens where they get exactly what they want. Maybe very rarely, but very, very rarely. So a lot of times you want somebody who checks off the majority of things, but can develop in other areas. Someone who has a foundation to grow upon, someone who has that hunger, someone, it's all about potential. We call it runway. We hire somebody and they have a good runway. They have a lot of good opportunity to be able to develop and grow in the areas that the job requires. Now, I know that it may not feel like companies are not looking for the ideal candidate, because sometimes we see these jobs posted for weeks and weeks, sometimes even months, or we see the job posted and then reposted, right? Look, don't get caught up in that. If you feel like you meet the majority of the qualifications, go ahead and apply. Never, never, ever, 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 ever disqualify yourself. Let them do it. Because at the end of the day, if you meet 70% of the stated qualifications, you should absolutely apply and interview with confidence. The other 30% can be handled through training and growth and learning on the job. And that is understood when someone is being brought into a role. So, like I said, a lot of times we will disqualify ourselves. A lot of times we are our own worst critic. So instead of saying to yourself that I'm not qualified, try saying, look, I'm qualified enough to be here and I'm excited to learn and grow. Say, look, they invited me to interview, which means they see potential in me. I was contacted about 2 or 3 months ago for a VP job. And I didn't even know the job was posted. The recruiter happened to see my profile on LinkedIn and he reached out to me. And I was like, oh, wow. And so they invited me to interview. And so even though, it was a higher level than I had been, I was, in fact, this is one of the jobs in my notebook, because I was absolutely trying to prepare to the hilt for these interviews, because I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, am I really qualified to do this? Do I have enough experience to do this? And so I was, in a way, sabotaging myself, because I was questioning, hey, do I really belong here? But if a recruiter is reaching out to you and inviting you to interview, you already up. All you have to do is let them in on the other wonderful things you have done or are able to do to be able to, seal the deal. So don't let your self doubt, especially if somebody reaches out to you, don't let that self doubt sabotage you. And the other inner critic voice is, I don't need to know everything. I need to show them how I think and solve problems. So again, if they ask you a question, you don't have to know the answer to everything. It's all about problem solving. Do you have a way of going about things to figure out how to solve the problem? Okay. So now let's talk about the competence versus confidence gap. And this most often occurs with women and underrepresented groups. We tend to experience this more intensely. And even though you might be extremely competent, you struggle with your confidence. So here is what will help with that. Remember, we talked about the brag book about 2 or 3 episodes where you keep a notebook or folder of all the great things you've done. Keep a running list of your accomplishments, especially if you're still working right now. You always want to have that handy because it's hard to go back and try to track it. But keep a list of those accomplishments handy, all the positive feedback, those, kudo emails you received, your awards and certificates, and read those before your interviews to remind you, hey, they would be very lucky to have me. I can absolutely do the job. Another way to deal with the confidence gap is, just positive perspective talking. Ask yourself, hey, well, if my best friend was going through all this self doubt and negative talk, what would I tell them? And then have that same conversation with yourself. And then the other thing, which I think is extremely powerful, is future visualization. Imagine yourself succeeding in the role. What would it look like? How would you feel? Imagine yourself just knocking the interview out of the park, you knocking them off their socks. What does it look like? Visualize yourself. And I'm telling you that the power of visualization, if you have not done it, oh my goodness, read up on it. Maybe I'll talk about it later on, but it is extremely powerful. So that is an absolute fantastic way to get over the confidence gap. Now, here's something that's a little counterintuitive. Over preparing can actually increase imposter syndrome because when you prepare so much for a job, you tend to feel like you are performing instead of being authentic. And it reinforces that feeling that, okay, this is not really who I am, and I'm naturally not good enough. So again, the goal isn't to know everything. The goal is to be prepared enough so that you can authentically be yourself, present your best self in the conversation. So, as you know, I love my AI. I think you use AI for a lot of things. And interestingly enough, you can use AI to address your imposter syndrome if this is something you struggle with. So, I want you to try this prompt. I'm experiencing imposter syndrome before an interview for whatever role it is. I feel like, and whatever your specific insecurity is, we talked about the different types of imposter syndromes, we talked about the different anxieties. Help me reframe this feeling and identify evidence of my qualifications and readiness for this opportunity. Because the AI is able to help you see your experience through a more objective lens and counter, those critical inner voices that you have. And again, I think that's where Chat GPT really comes into play, where it's really good, because if you've been feeding Chat GPT your job descriptions, your accomplishments, your market strategy, all of your research, it already knows you, right? And so it's going to be able to give you objective feedback, balanced feedback from this prompt based on what you've already fed it. So I think that's where ChatGPT is invaluable in that regard. It can kind of play as a therapist or career coach. Okay, so let's talk about managing fear and the unknown, because these are two psychological barriers that can absolutely derail all of the preparation that you may do. So let's first talk about the fear of rejection. So the fear of rejection runs deep because it is tied to our self worth, to external validation. a no from an employer can be taken as a no as you as a person and not just a fit for the role. And I tell people who are laid off, this is something they deal with as well, right? Being laid off, thank you, but your service is no longer needed. You have to detach yourself from the job. It isn't that you weren't needed, it is that the job wasn't needed. And this is exactly how you need to approach rejections from the job search process. So, again, it's never about your worth as a person. There's so many things that go into play that people don't understand. We are looking for not only how you meet the job requirements that's on the job description, but it's all about cultural fit with the company, skill fit, the team dynamics, budget fit, timing fit, all of those things. And I've seen, I mean, we've had some really, really knockout candidates that we did not extend an offer to because of several things. Sometimes they were overqualified and we felt like they would get bored and would leave, sooner than we wanted to. Their experience was in a different industry and we really needed somebody who could hit the ground running. It could be that their salary expectations were outside our budget. We knew that their personality type would mesh with other, key people on the team. It could be that, hey, we decided to go ahead and promote an internal person. So let me talk about that a little bit because that happens a lot. A lot of times for these positions, companies have to choose to post it both internally and externally. So we say that they have a preferred candidate, right? The preferred candidate is an internal candidate, but they want to, HR and the business encourages hiring managers to post it outside just to see what's out there. And we will interview a number of people, but we may decide to go with the internal candidate for whatever reason, right? Because we know that this person knows the organization, they can hit the ground running, but we just want to see what else was out there. And I know it is disheartening, but oftentimes that's what happens. So for those reasons, you never know what may happen down the road. So when you are rejected, it is so important to be gracious and courteous because you never know when they may swing back around. Okay. Now, but at the end of the day, none of them reflects your competence or value. It's just a whole bunch of other things that doesn't have anything to do with that. So when you get these rejection calls or emails, and I get them, and it's so disheartening, right? Instead of thinking, okay, another company didn't want me, say, hey, this wasn't the right fit for either of us. This gives me information about what to look for in my next opportunity. Hey, every interview is practice for the right opportunity. I think that's a big one. There is no such thing as a bad interview because every single time you interview, you are able to get better and better. And then finally, note that their decision says more about their needs than it does my abilities. So that's a way to reframe the rejection from seeing it as a measure of your self worth versus what the company really needed for the role. Okay. Now, at the end of the day, the job search game is somewhat a numbers game. And even the most qualified candidates typically need to interview several times before they find the right fit. And again, it isn't a reflection of their qualifications, it's just the math. So if you are interviewing and not getting offers, one, yay for you, because that means that your resume and or your LinkedIn profile is working and is strong enough to get you those interviews and get you in the door. Mind you, there's a lot of people who's, not getting those opportunities, but you just haven't found the right fit. So keep going. Okay. Keep going. You're doing something right. You're on the right path. It's just a matter of time. Now let's talk about the fear of the unknown. So the fear of the unknown is where you don't know what to expect and your brain fills the blank with the worst case scenario you can think of. So some common unknown fears are, What if they ask a question I can't answer? What if the interviewer is intimidating or hostile? What if I have a Wi-Fi problem, during the interview or my computer crashes? What if I'm driving there and I get lost, I'm terribly late, and what if they ask me about something negative from my past? Those are all the things that are spinning in your head. So instead of trying to predict every possible scenario, you'll want to build your tolerance for uncertainty, meaning that, okay, whatever happens, I'm going to be able to handle it. Okay. I I have a girlfriend who is very anal. She's one of these people that just has to know everything, right? And so when I used to travel a lot and flights are getting delayed, flights are getting canceled, she was like, oh my goodness, I would just go crazy. And I'm like, but why? These are things out of my control. And I just deal with it as they occur. And that is how I learned to deal with it, and how I have the same kind of thought process that I apply to interviewing. I'm not going to know everything, but when something comes about that I feel like I wasn't prepared for, I'm going to be able to handle it in the moment. So, in terms of practical uncertainty management, accept the fact that you can't control everything, right? But you can control your preparation and response. Focus on what you do know, and that is your experience and your background, the research you've done on a company, and the reasons why you're interested in the role. Prepare flexible responses instead of scripted answers, because I know when I'm trying to prepare for my responses, word by word, I get paralyzed, right? So just at a high level, say, okay, if I'm asked this question, I know at a high level this is what I'm going to talk about, and you can elaborate on it in the moment. But when you try to memorize every and the, those things, it can really, really trip you up. And then remember that as interviewers, we are rooting for you to succeed, because again, the job search process is expensive and it's timely. And I know particularly for recruiters, they love pleasing the hiring managers, because that's kudos for them when the hiring managers able to say, you know what? Latanya presented me with 5 candidates. All of them were extremely strong, and it was hard to pick one. So when you are being presented in front of the interviewers, and especially that hiring manager, people are crossing their fingers that you're going to succeed. So go into it knowing that. Okay. Now, again, it's okay to not know something in an interview. And what matters most importantly is how you handle it. So instead of panicking when they ask you something you don't know, some responses you can use are the following. That's a great question. I don't have direct experience with that, but here's how I would approach it. Because again, it's more important about the problem solving. How do you go about solving problems? And that's a great opportunity to demonstrate how you solve problems. Another one, I haven't encountered that specific situation, but based on my experience with this situation, I would do so and so and so and so. That's another way you can respond instead of making something up. Another one, I'm not familiar with that particular system, but I've successfully learned similar tools in the past. Can you tell me more about how it's used here? That is going to show curiosity and interest, and already your thought process in terms of how you can apply what you learned on other systems, or how you went about learning other systems to their system. So an intellectual curiosity is always a good thing. So the preparation that will allow you to reduce fear is not over preparing, but it is strategic preparation, smart preparation. So what does that look like? It is researching the company and the role very thoroughly. And we'll talk about that next week, because there's so much information out there available. AI absolutely makes it a lot easier. So you have that information available, to you. Practice your key stories until they feel natural. when we talked about the brag book and your star plus stories, you want to have those down pat. And I'm telling you, it's a game changer. When you know those stories like the back of your hand and you're just able to rip them off your tongue, it is extremely impressive, and it allows you to remain calm and confident in the interview. Prepare thoughtful questions to ask them. It kills me, you know, when people don't have, I think most people know that they need to ask questions at the end, but some of the questions are not very well thought out. So you want to have very thoughtful questions to ask at the end. Plan the logistics. I don't care whether that's you're interviewing in person or you are interviewing online. Again, you always want to arrive early. Even if it's on video, you want to sign on maybe 10 minutes early, test your system and make sure everything is okay. Because when you're able to plan in advance, it allows you to calm down. I know sometimes when I've gotten tripped up and I'm not able to sign on until like 5 minutes before, I'm panicking when I'm waiting for my computer. Of course, it always happens. It decides to, have an update. It's going to take 5 or so minutes to do. So you want to go ahead and make sure all that stuff is well taken care of and, test it out before you actually have a video interview, or at least, prepare in advance. If you're going to be in a physical location, you have to travel there. And then just have a backup plan for the most, common problems. But the most important thing is to know is that you cannot prepare for absolutely everything, and that is okay. So now let's talk about building the type of confidence that is going to serve you well in an interview. And I'm not talking about the fake it till you make it type of thing, because you can see right through that. I'm talking about the real, authentic, grounded confidence that, is going to be based on one, your self-awareness, and also your, preparation. So there is a fine line between confidence and arrogance. And trust me, when we've interviewed arrogant people, I mean, they could have been the smartest person in the world. They could have been very, very close to the ideal candidate. But that arrogance is a turnoff, and we have decided to pass on those people. So again, there's a fine balance. So let's review these, very briefly. So confidence says, I have relevant experience and I'm excited to learn more. Arrogance says, hey, I already know everything I need to know. And you'd be surprised how people come across in some of these interviews, the thing that they would say. So it's good to be aware of these. So confidence says, hey, I've solved similar challenges before and I believe I can help here too. Arrogance says, your problems are easy and I can fix everything. Another one, confidence says, I'm qualified for this role and I'm also committed to growing. Arrogance says, I'm overqualified and you're lucky I'm even considering this. So again, I have seen some of these in some shape, form, or fashion over the years interviewing people, and it ain't cute. It ain't cute at all. So you just want to keep in mind how you're coming across. You do want to come across confident, but you don't want to come in, appearing to be arrogant. And so to build up your confidence, there's 5 things you can take a look at. One, your accomplishment inventory. We kind of talked about that earlier. Your skills assessment, know the 8 to 10 professional skills with specific examples of how you've used each one. There's a growth mindset, documentation. Identify 3 to 5 things when you successfully learned something new or overcame a challenge. Another one is a feedback collection, gathering the positive feedback from colleagues and managers and clients and mentors. And then the last one is a value proposition clarity, where you are able to articulate in 2 to 3 sentences what unique value you bring to employers. Now, again, there's the prep that you're going to do, where you're going to research the company, prepare your answers and all of that. But I think in terms of dealing with anxiety, there are also some things that would be helpful for you to do to be able to manage it. So, let's look at 3 things. The physical preparation. You can do power poses. You can do deep breathing exercises. Deep breathing exercises are great for calming your nervous system and helping you calm down before an interview. and also light exercise or movement to release tension. Mental preparation includes reviewing your accomplishment inventory, visualizing that the interview will go well, reminding yourself why you're interested in this opportunity, and setting an intention for the conversation. And then emotional preparation, acknowledging your nervousness without judgment, focus on curiosity about the role and company. And remember, it is a two-way evaluation. You're not only looking to be chosen, you are looking at who you're going to choose. Who are you going to choose to spend some period of time of your career in? What organization, right? That's a very big decision. And I get we all have to work to make money, but at the end of the day, it's a very important decision and it should be a two-way evaluation. I think we sometimes forget that. Now, there are some times you're in the interview and you know you bombed a question or they asked you something and you could not think of an answer. And as you're going through the motions in the interview, you're still thinking about, I didn't answer that right. I just killed this interview. I just messed up. There is a way that you can recover, right? So sometimes if you stumble over words, take a deep breath and say, you know what? Let me start over. Let me reframe that. Or say, hey, what I meant to say is, when they ask you a question, you can't think of an example, say, hey, that's a great question. Let me think for a moment so I can give you the best example. And then get your thoughts together and then respond. If you realize you gave a weak answer, and I know this has happened to me, um, you can go back and say, you know what? You asked me a question about this, and I actually thought of a better example. So may I, give you a better answer to what I said before? And they were respected. I remember I was thinking about this the other day. When I was in grad school, I had a summer internship, and it was a group of us, right, for this company. And we had to give like a group presentation to all the leaders. And we were in a big conference room or something. I mean, it was like 60, 70 people in there. And as I'm standing up and they asked us something, I want to say it has something to do with unions, ironically. And I answered the question because they passed, people could take the interview, the microphone and answer. And of course, we're all trying to get visibility. So everybody wanted an opportunity to be able to answer a question, to be able to present in front of these leaders. I got the microphone and I'm talking, and I noticed people kind of look at me kind of strange, but it wasn't until later I realized that I completely gave the wrong answer. And I was like, oh. So we sat back down and there were still discussions taking place in the meeting or whatever. And they had brought up something that I had experienced in my internship that summer, something specifically at my plant. So I raised my hand and I said, hey, that reminds me, I, completely misspoke earlier, but in reference to that question and this experience, this is what I did, or this is what I think. I can't remember exactly. But what I do remember is the head of HR for my business unit who I worked under. She was like, oh my goodness, LaTanya, that was fantastic. And I think people remembered me because I looped back to restate something I had said earlier that wasn't really on point. So sometimes when you do that, it makes you look stronger, actually. So don't be afraid to say, hey, you know what? I want to go back to a question you asked me earlier and I misspoke or I didn't give a very good example. So if you would, allow me to do that now, it puts you in a position of power. Okay, so let's talk about authenticity. Um, Ironically, the more you try to be perfect, the less confidence you appear. And you've seen those kind of people when, they try to be all big and bad or whatever. And they try and we say they trying too much. You doing too much. You trying too much. You trying too hard. That's how it comes across, that ain't really you. So authenticity requires vulnerability, and vulnerability when combined with competence actually increases trust and likability. I know for me, I think the most frequent accolade that I have gotten over the course of my career is my authenticity. And I have learned that people value authenticity more than anything. And I've told that to my team, right? When I've had people reporting to me, they don't really care about the, company speak and all of that. They want to know that you're real. They want to know that you are authentic. They want to know that they can trust you. And that is how I've been able to build trust over the years. It's about authenticity. So when you are in these interviews, it's okay to show enthusiasm and that you really want the job. It is okay to admit that you don't know something. It is okay to ask clarifying questions. It is okay to take a moment before you answer something. And it is okay to show your personality. We want to know that we're hiring real, authentic, genuine people. So don't be afraid to show these types of emotion and characteristics in your interviews. Now, let's talk about overcoming negative bias from past experiences. And this is a huge one. If you have had negative experiences prior, I don't care if it's with a prior company or in interviews, it can absolutely negatively impact your interview performance. There was a young lady that I met that I started coaching. She had been laid off after being on her job, I think it was 27 years. She was so bitter about being let go. So bitter. And I finally had to have a very frank conversation with her. Let it go because you are so bent on being wrong by this company that you can't even present your best self to another company. Accept the fact that it was time for you to move on. Focus on being excited about a new opportunity and a new beginning so that that can come across in your interviews. And so it just so happened a couple of weeks after that, through networking, she got an opportunity to interview. And I remember she reached out to me afterwards, after she had gotten the offer, and said, "LaTanya, I cannot thank you enough because had it not been for you really giving me that talk, I don't know that I would have been able to interview well to be able to get the job." So all of us, again, especially if you've been laid off, one, you have the rejection so-called from the company, but two, if you have been in the job search game for a period of time and you've been interviewing and you've been applying, it's very fatiguing, and I get it. It wears down on you, and unfortunately that comes across in your interviews. You're coming across as being downtrodden. You're coming across as being insecure and not confident. That's how it's coming across, whether you see it or not. So you want to be able to let go of those negative biases. So again, so that you can, kill it in the interview. So some common negative scripts we tell ourselves are, "Hey, I was laid off, so employees will think I'm damaged goods." But the reality is that, hey, layoffs are so common now that, it's not a surprise. And people know that they rarely have anything to do with individual performance. So, you can let that stigma go. Another one is, "Hey, I bombed my last interview, so I'll probably mess this one up too." Look, every interview is different. And just because you bomb one doesn't mean you're going to bomb the next one. This is an opportunity for you to knock it out of park. So let go of that negative experience and focus on the one ahead. The next one is, "Hey, I've been unemployed for months, and so something must be wrong with me." I have dealt with that at times. And so you need to understand the job market is complex and it is challenging. And there are thousands, literally thousands and thousands of people out there also vying for the same job. So it's all about timing, competition, economic factors, and fit that all play a role in hiring decisions. It doesn't mean that anything is wrong with you. And then finally, I don't have a traditional background, so they won't take me seriously. So the reality is that it's non-traditional backgrounds sometimes that are the most attractive because they're able to bring a unique perspective and an approach to problem solving that companies value. So use that as a competitive edge and not as a disadvantage. Okay. So those are some things that I think all of us at some point will need to, tell ourselves and reframe the story. Okay, so now that we've gone through all of that, I want to give you some very practical anxiety management strategies. So, what you can actually do before you interview, and these are evidence based strategies that will work. So, before the interview, there's a 24-hour prep protocol. You want to do your final preparation, then you want to stop. Like I know some people, they'll just study all night long. They get up in the morning, they studying. At some point, you have to stop so that you can relax and let your brain absorb the information and then reset to get ready to have a discussion. You want to get a good night's sleep because anxiety is definitely worse when you're tired. Avoid caffeine after 2 p.m. because it can have an effect on your thinking and your sleeping. And then do something that relaxes and make you feel good. The day of the interview, eat a protein rich breakfast to stabilize your blood sugar. You want to arrive early, be it on video or in an office, um, so that you can get ready, but not too early, right? If you get there 30 minutes, you're just sitting there again, trying to feverishly go over your notes, thinking about, oh, what they asked me this, what we do that. So 30 minutes is too far in advance. 10 to 15 is sufficient. You want to bring mints and tissues and a backup copy of your resume and do those breathing exercises we talked about. And there's plenty you can find online. Okay. So those are some of the things that you can do. Now, in the interview, if you're feeling overwhelmed, just say, okay, you know what? Hold on. I'm sorry. Let me just have a moment to collect my thoughts. Take 3 deep breaths and then start again. If you blank out, and I know this happens to me, just say, you know what? That's a great question. Let me think about that for a moment and give you the best example to share with you. All right. And that's going to buy you some time. If you find you're talking too fast, that is me also. Say, okay, hold on. Let me slow down and give you a more thoughtful answer and then consciously be mindful of your rate of speech. Because I know for me, especially when I'm nervous, I'm just talking. And it's like, okay, you know what? Let me slow down. So either I'll just say that in my head, or if I feel like I am losing the interviewer or I've lost them, I'll say, okay, you know what? Let me slow down. My mind is thinking very rapidly. Let me slow down and give you a thoughtful response. And again, it shows control. If you are a shaker, and I have done this before, luckily I haven't done it, in recent years, but if you're shaking, it helps to hold a pen or put your hands in your lap. But it is normal, and interviewers normally won't notice it or ding you for it. But that's just something to help you, calm your nerves and not be so self-conscious about it. So, after the interview, if you're like me, you often replay every single thing that was said and obsess over things that you should have said and how you should have said things. And you don't want to do that. But a healthy post interview protocol is write down what well and what you learned, because that's going to help you in your future interviews. You want to send your thank you notes within 24 hours. Yes, that still matters. You'll want to do something completely unrelated to the job searching just to give you a break. You'll want to avoid replaying the conversation endlessly. And then you want to go ahead and start focusing on your next opportunity. But remember, you can't control the outcome, but you can definitely control your effort and response. So let's now bring this home. It's about your anxiety, and it's your anxiety that sometimes sabotages your interview and not your preparedness or your experience. Um, Anxiety is about working with your natural human response in a way that's going to serve you well and give you an advantage versus working against you. And we've talked about all those techniques. So for this week, again, I've given you your homework. You'll see it here. So this week you can, practice some of the evidence-based confidence building exercises, research some breathing techniques and try those out when you're not stressed. And then try one of the AI prompts to work through a specific anxiety or the imposter syndrome issue if that's your issue. Before your next interview, implement a 24-hour prep protocol and see how that works for you. And let me know. I'd be curious to hear how that works for you. Practice your pre-interview confidence ritual and then work on consciously reframing any negative narratives about your background. During the interview, remember that nervousness shows that you care. Use grounding techniques if anxiety spikes, and focus on authentic connection over perfect performance. Now, after the interview, celebrate the courage. You got through it. You showed up, you showed out, and that's a lot to be proud of. Learn from the experience and don't obsess over it. And then finally, trust that the right opportunity will recognize your value. I think that's so important. I so believe that everything happens for a reason. And I know when I have interviewed for jobs that I felt like I really, really wanted, I didn't get it. I didn't understand it in the moment, but later on down the road, I was like, oh, that's why that opportunity didn't work out. So trust the process. Okay. So for next week, we are going to talk about the strategic preparation, mastering the difficult questions, compensating for people who interview who don't know what the hell they're doing. Some virtual interviewing best practices and some follow-up strategies that will help distinguish you from the other candidates. So we're going to talk about that for next week. So here's what I want you to take away from today, though. Your anxiety does not disqualify you, and it is actually good, and you are able to use it in a way to your advantage, just like the elite athletes do. You just have to be willing to recognize it, face it, and then deal with it. And the fact that you're here listening to this, I know a lot of you take notes, you're already in the right headspace, right? You're already in the right headspace and you're already ready to deal with it despite your fears. So that is courage, that's step, that's resilience. And that's the exact mindset that a lot of employers are looking for. So keep killing it, keep crushing it. Again, if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button. Share this with somebody who can use it, because I know there's a lot of people who are out here interviewing that get nervous like I do. Please share this with them and like it. Follow me on my social media, Exit to Excel, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. Ask me your questions. Tag me. AskLT. Ask me your questions there. Feel free to DM me. Remember, I am your HR business partner secret weapon. Even if it's not related to the job search process, if you're dealing with some kind of challenge in the workplace, let me know. I'm going to give you the real deal. Okay. But, stay strong. Remember, the right opportunity is going to recognize your value. Your job is just to show up, show out, be authentic and confident, and the right opportunity will come. So until then, take care, and I'll see you next week.